Of course, I'm part of this group of people, men specifically, who grew up without dads and in single parent households, and that shaped a lot of the opportunities that I didn't have. And I think that is a social issue that is created for a large segment of American citizens. Men who grew up without men in their lives, and the lessons and the things that they don't have growing up. I also think when you're a child who grows up without, or grows up with a parent who's incarcerated, there's a stigma that you carry. And so when you go to school, when you're with your friends, you're the kid whose dad is in jail. And so there's just kind of those emotional things that you don't feel great, you don't feel like you fit in all the time. And sometimes it goes further. When I was in fourth grade, there was a kid who I didn't get along with, like 9 and 10-year-olds do, they fight. And the kid told the teacher that his backpack was stolen. And he said they thought it was me. And so the police came to my house, they searched our house, and it was like terrifying. And they said, "You're gonna go to prison if you don't tell us where this backpack is." And it turns out the kid left the backpack in the classroom. It was like a silly thing. But because in the little small town in California I grew up in, there was this idea that he's the kid of a criminal. They're all that whole family. They're all criminals, and I think that happens for a lot of young people who have parents who are incarcerated. And in my own experience growing up, I felt often like I was scared. I was terrified. Like someday I'm going to go to jail. Someday I'm going to be in prison because that's what happens to my family. As I became an adult and started working with young people who were incarcerated, I realized that was a feeling that not only I had, but that kids, especially boys who have fathers who are incarcerated, that's something they carry with them all the time. Going to prison isn't a thing that happens to other people. It's not a thing that happens like, could it happen to me? It's a thing that will happen. The question is just when. Yeah, I think there's an obvious link between kids who don't graduate from high school and who end up in jail. Statistically, those are numbers you can find, and it's pretty clear. If you don't graduate from high school, the likelihood that you'll be incarcerated is extremely high. I think beyond that, there are ways in which kids, teenagers, even preteens, get into the criminal justice system before they even have a chance to be successful in high school. In the last 7 or 8 years, the phrase the school-to-prison pipeline has become a talking point for politicians, at least politicians on the left. And it comes out of this idea that kids who are having a hard time in school, for a lot of different reasons, they end up invariably going to jail or being involved in criminal justice in some way. And I think that some of that is because we haven't thought about the kind of resources that kids and families need to be successful when they're struggling in school. And so all we do is we put a kid in jail. We get the police involved when a kid is acting out. I taught in a public school in the Bronx, and I know what it's like to have a big, scary teenage kid who's angry and has had a really hard life, screaming in your face. And as a teacher, it's I don't want that. I'm scared of that. I'm concerned for my safety and the safety of others. And so I do think schools have to deal with those things. You can't just let kids who have issues with anger, who refuse to participate, you can't just let that kind of just happen and carry on with school. But there has to be better ways than either be in school, do everything you're told, or go to jail. And we know that that's the case because in places where poverty isn't high, that's not what happens for kids who are having a hard time in school. They have resources, they have people who connect with them, and help them sort out what it is that's going on in their lives that prevents them from being successful in school. And I think that another way, and this is one of the things that people don't talk about a lot that I think is particularly frustrating. Foster care is a part of the way that kids get from school and involved in criminal justice. Kids are taken out of their homes, placed in foster care at rates that are probably higher than they need to be. Sometimes kids are unsafe, and if a kid is being neglected or abused or isn't getting what they need to be successful, to survive, to be healthy, of course there needs to be intervention. But what we've seen is over the 3 decades, kids are taken out of their homes, and then the trend is for them to stay out of their homes. They go into foster care, and then they're angry and they're frustrated, so they make choices that end up getting criminal justice involved. So then they go to jail, or they go to like a residential care or a group home, and it just starts down a cycle. And you see it over and over. A kid is taken out of their home, sometimes for the craziest reasons in the world. Right? We in the last place I worked, we'd have kids in residential group home care who were teens and had been in foster care for 5 or 6 years. And the original reason they were taken out of their home was because of truancy. Because they refused to go to school as a 9 or a 10-year-old. And their parents didn't make them go to school, and nobody figured out how to get them to school. So this kid went into foster care, and the kid was angry. And then the kid went into a group home, and the kid was angry, kept making. And then, by the time that 9-year-old who was taken out of their home just for not going to school, they're 18, they're in prison, right? They're going upstate. And that's an entire life wasted because we couldn't figure out a better way to get a kid to attend school. We never asked the question of why is this kid not going? What's the problem? And I think that happens a lot. And those things aren't talked about. Those connections aren't made because it's complicated, right? It's a multi-step process. And because people don't want to bash the foster care system who work in it, because it does do good things and it does save lives and it does help put families back together sometimes. But too often the focus is on taking a kid out of a home when there's a problem rather than finding ways to work with the family and keep the family together. And I think in this question of recidivism, education, juveniles who are incarcerated, the key link is having a family that cares about you. And sometimes families really struggle with that. And it might be financial reasons, it might be emotional reasons, it might be a host of things going on. But if a kid doesn't have at least one person in their life who they know cares about them, who is concerned about what they're going to do with their lives, who is hopeful that they're going to do something great or become something wonderful, that kid is not going to be successful. And so I think a linchpin of fixing this problem of recidivism in education and criminal justice for young people is making sure that we're supporting families and helping families care for their kids. And if a family really can't care for their kids, then finding another family that will. Yeah, so I think when it comes to adults, and I think the reasons that people get into a cycle of going in and out of prison, I think those are different reasons than when we're talking about young people and kids. And so with adults, I think there are systems in place that are discriminatory against people who have committed a crime, been in jail or prison, and come out. The idea that we have of jail is that it's correctional, right? We call them correctional facilities. So you make a mistake, you make a bad choice, you do something bad. The idea is you go in, you serve your time, you pay a debt to society, and then you come back out and your life moves on. But anybody who's worked with people who've been in jail, or anyone who has had a family member be in jail, you know that the system really isn't designed that way. Most people in jail or prison get very few, if any, actual rehabilitative services. There's very little correction that goes on. There's no processes and practices for addressing why someone may have committed whatever crime they commit. And then when you come out, in almost every state, you're not a full citizen anymore. You can't vote. You've lost your fundamental right to participate in democracy. In almost every state, you have to declare that you've been in jail or prison if you're applying for jobs. And so once you're convicted of a crime, you essentially forever are on this list, and you don't get to move on, right? There is no correction, there is no reform, because this thing that happened will always be carried along with you. And it doesn't matter if you did something violent and really horrible, or if you stole something small, or used illicit drugs. The system has no kind of way to even sort those things out, right? If you're convicted of a crime, even if you're not going to be in a prison for your whole life, it's a life sentence. And so I think for adults, I think the high rates of recidivism revolve around those kinds of things. I also think with when people are in prison, often for minor things, they tend to learn how to be better criminals. And we see that, especially with young people. I think that's true for adults too. So we see a lot of young people who go to jail when they're 17, 18, 19. They are definitely going to go back to jail. And the 4 years ago, the last time I really looked at these numbers, it was something like 85% of teenagers, 17 to 19, who spend time in jail will go back at least once in their life. 85%. It's staggering. And I think some of that is because people who wouldn't normally commit crimes or even know or learn or have the kind of relationships to be involved in those things, they learn them. They earn them. They build their professional network in prison. 18 years old, they should be a freshman in college or graduating high school, and they should be meeting their friends and teachers and professors. And instead, they're meeting other people who are spending time in jail and who are participating in an illicit world of things that they shouldn't be doing. And I think those are powerful lessons that they learn. I think the same kind of thing applies to young people. When you go to jail during your most formative years, you take on the culture of jail. When you grow up in poverty, you take on a culture of poverty. When you grow up and you go to a really great independent school with nice people who have a lot of professional connections and teachers with PhDs who want to help you get into a great college, you take on that role, right? Like we all take on an identity of the environment we're in. So if you spend most of your life incarcerated or in systems that function like incarceration, group homes, foster care, residential care, you take on that identity, just as any of us do. And so I think that is a key reason why there should be interventions for young people that keep them totally away from criminal justice. When kids make bad choices, when kids make mistakes, there have to be consequences. You can't let those things go. That's not fair to the law-abiding public. It's not fair to the communities that are feeling victimized by whatever behavior. But if we really care about that kid finding a way to be successful in his or her life, then we cannot throw them into jails or systems that function just like jails. We have to find ways to help them pay back their debt, correct their behavior, learn a better way, a different way to be, and be able to take on the attributes of an environment that we want them to be like. If we don't want them to be like prison, we can't put them in places like prisons. I think there are reasons to both be pessimistic and to be optimistic. I'm optimistic because I do think there are a lot of organizations and individuals who understand the problem and who are working to try and find ways to work with kids and families who've committed crimes or who have issues. And there are some smart strategies out there. There's a lot of work being done on bringing in social services professionals, therapists, counselors, social workers into people's homes when there's an issue within the family rather than pulling kids out. And I think that's a phenomenal thing to do to prevent kids from getting into those systems that feel and act like jails and prisons.